I'd like to thank you all very, very much for coming here on your Monday evening. I'd also like to thank our speakers as well. So people have come from the UK, but also people have come from further afield, including Catalonia and Oregon. And these people do not take flying lightly. So it's a big reason that they come here, and I'm tremendously grateful for all of you for coming over. So why are we here? Well, as you probably all know, we're at a critical point on this planet, a tipping point, in fact, in terms of biodiversity loss, degraded soils, and climate change. So I think it's good to have some context of how we got here, because we, at a species level, ceased to be hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago, and we learned to farm, we learned how to create communities, we learned how to specialize, and we ended up doing our own roles in villages, and which became towns, and which became cities. And we started to modify our natural environment by means of cultivation, irrigation, deforestation. And eventually, we ended up making too much food, surplus production, leading to population growth. And more recently, we've actually become even more ruthless and efficient at farming in particular. And particularly since the Second World War, we've seen the adoption of commercially available pesticides, herbicides, and synthetic fertilizers, enabling us to become even more effective at eliminating competition, disease, predators, and so on. And perversely, having to then put synthetic man-made materials back into the soil to put back in everything that we've taken out. So it's a little bit loopy, and that's what we're here to try and fix today. So we've become incredibly efficient at food production, to the extent that we actually now produce more food in the world than we consume. And Mimi and I agree that we perhaps produce more calories than we consume, but the nutritional content of a lot of the food is really dropping off the floor. So lots of it, but it's not always very good, and we're not very good at distributing it around the world either. So we're continuing to cut down forests and plant more crops to feed the world that we can already feed. There's a lot more food wastage than certainly I would like to see. And all this is leading to agriculture's impact on the environment. So climate change, biodiversity loss, and mass species extinction. And agriculture, depending on how you measure it, is a major cause of greenhouse gas pollution and climate change. And climate change is now disrupting agriculture. So it's a man-made vicious circle. And yet the irony is, Mother Nature is incredibly forgiving and is able to regenerate herself, but we need to unlearn what we've learned and let her show us the way. I was saying to Mimi earlier that we had our own wine estate was hit by forest fires in August last year. All the forests around us burned, and we lost all our crop. But the optimism that nature has shown us is incredible. So the blackened cork oaks, now I know why the bark is so thick, because those cork oaks, even though they're completely black, those green shoots are giving us the cause for optimism. And nature has an amazing way to regenerate. So in fact, regenerative agriculture is becoming more and more commonplace in general agriculture. Some of the largest food companies in the world are adopting their versions of regenerative agriculture. So it is happening. But we in the wine world need to do our bit. We need to move away from this concept of monoculture and start actively encouraging plant, animal, and microbial life in the soil to really bring back biodiversity. But the thing is, we can't just sell our tractors and plows and let nature take over the vineyards. We need to start taking small steps and to reintroduce nature in an intelligent way that helps us maintain our vineyards, maintain our yields, and ultimately make better fruit. So if we could make better quality fruit, better quality wine, less impact on the environment, and lower input costs, then what's not to like about this way of farming? It's really as simple as that. So the purpose of the foundation is to help build the knowledge of how to move towards regenerative viticulture in a way that doesn't disrupt our businesses, migrating towards a holistic way of farming. And regenerative farming is like a toolbox provided for us by nature. So we need to get really proficient on how to use it effectively. And the reason why I became involved in this foundation is because we bought a wine estate in Provence 2.5 years ago, and the soil quality, the organic life in the soil was really low. And we knew that just converting it to organic wasn't going to make it better. It was just doing less of the bad stuff, but it wasn't going to make it better. And then somebody sent me an article written by Eric Asimov, the New York Times wine journalist, about a lady called Casteel, who's now here. Because I phoned up Mimi, and the article was all about regenerative farming, and there were pictures of sheep and ducks and all sorts of wildlife on the farm, and I thought, I like the look of that, because it was a vineyard. And so I reached out to Mimi, and we've also, in fact, somebody else in our village is a permaculturist from Denmark. Even though I live in France, we're a bit of a melting pot. And he and Mimi and I started talking on Zoom calls 18 months ago. And basically we've realized there wasn't a great resource for wine farmers like me to learn how to become regenerative. So we said, well, let's create one. Let's create a resource where people can come and learn from others, can understand how to read, how to study, how to make those baby steps. And here we are today. So we launched we created a charity in July last year, and today is our official launch date. So thanks again for coming along. So I'm now going to hand you over to Justin Howard-Sneyd, who is a master of wine and a consultant and winemaker. You have more hats than any hat stand can stand. He's also a council member of the Institute of Masters of Wine, and he also teaches at the Dartington Trust. So he's a very qualified fellow to talk to us about and to explain to us about the principles of regenerative farming. So I'll hand you over to Justin. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and it's wonderful to be here. And I just feel also I should just say at the outset that I am not a regenerative farmer yet. I am starting the journey. So I think sometimes the best people to talk to you about something are people who've just learnt it themselves. I've spent the last year really mugging up on regenerative agriculture and viticulture, and I'm keen to start practicing some of those things that I'm learning in France. But I don't want to position myself here as an expert. I'm certainly not. We have some experts here to talk to us today. In fact, actually no one is really an expert yet in regenerative viticulture. It's quite a new discipline, and it's something that we all need to share the knowledge that we're gaining as we go. So I'm going to talk to you very quickly, hopefully in about 12 minutes, about what is regenerative viticulture, what are the key principles, and why do we need it. I think Stephen spoke very eloquently about the climate challenge and the biodiversity collapse. This is actually a picture that we took at Miguel's place in October last year, and he's started recently farming regeneratively. Here we have the key principle of regenerative, and the key differential between this and other forms of farming is not tilling the soil. So that's, if there's one takeaway, you haven't grasped this important point, that's the main thing that you do regeneratively that you don't do in other disciplines. Obviously with that comes cover crops as a very important principle, and how you control those cover crops and how you keep them in order then also involves animal grazing, which involves fertilisation, which is another important principle, composting and minimising chemical use, and also in some disciplines agroforestry, growing trees within your crops. And so there's some regenerative grape growers are starting to plant trees in the vineyard or plant strips of trees between their vines. Goode in the Roussillon, for instance, does that, and that's, I think, a very interesting thing to talk about. I know Mimi's got some thoughts about vines and trees and their partnerships together. I'm just going to show you the world this is a slide from our World in Data. It's all the land on the world, the habitable land, the agricultural land, is about 50 million square kilometres. And of that, about a quarter is cropland, the rest is animal grazing. So we're talking about 11 million square kilometres, it's 1.1 billion hectares. And wine is about just under 1% of that. It's about 7.3 million hectares. Now that is only less than 1% of the world's cropland, but it's the bit that all of us here in this room care about. We can't do as much as we can, we can't do anything about other forms of agriculture. We can do something about the land that we control, the products that we work with. So our job, as stewards of the planet, is to try and do the bit that we can influence, and this is our world. And 7.3 million hectares is a lot of land. Okay. In some countries, France, for instance, is actually 3% of agricultural land, but really importantly, it actually generates 15% of the economic value of that land. So wine punches way above its weight. It's a really added value product. You get a much better return in financial terms from, well, not necessarily a return in terms of profit, but a return in terms of income from wine than you do from other crops. And it also leads the conversation about land use. There are not many people who would have, well, you're all in the wine world, but carrot farmers don't have so many conferences as grape growers, I think. We lead the conversation, and it's, I think, important if we're trying to teach consumers how we're working to talk to them through a medium that they are interested in. I think this is probably a conventional picture. I don't know if you get a WSET textbook now, but this is the kind of thing you might expect to see. It's a kind of hierarchy of quality of environmental impact. So conventional farming at the bottom, sustainable, organic, biodynamic. I think it's a little bit of a false model, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a while. And I know when I speak to Jamie about it, he's going to be talking to us soon, and he's delving deeply into the subject at the moment. I think it's a slightly false model, and our belief so the other point is that biodynamic still only reached less than 1% of the world's vineyards, organic still less, I think, than 3%, sustainable, there's so many new certifications popping up, but it's certainly less than 20% of the world's vineyards, and there's still therefore 70-something% of vineyards farmed conventionally. And if we're going to make an impact, we need to talk to everybody. So our view is that regenerative farming techniques, at whatever level you are, will work on improving soil health. And that by doing that, you can lift the soil health of conventional vineyards, you can lift the soil health of sustainable, organic, and biodynamic. So although biodynamics practice a lot of regenerative practices, they're not doing everything they can do, and they're doing some things that are potentially destructive or negative for soil health. We'll talk about that in a little minute. And even an organic producer, they can degrade their soil by driving on it all the time, by compacting it, by using a lot of copper. Some organic vineyards and the industrialization of organic doesn't necessarily result in top quality soil. So we're interested in trying to introduce practices that improve soil health. That is really the fundamental principle. This is a slide drawn from Jessica Villat, who I think is Jessica. I saw you earlier on. Where are you now? There you are. Jessica wrote a very good paper recently, which is collating a lot of research on regenerative practices in vineyards. And this is just a simple slide to say that the status quo is actually an extractive status quo. We're depleting the quality of our farmland and our vineyards at the moment. And gunning for sustainable only stops that and holds it where it is. It doesn't do anything to build it back. And regenerative practices intend to contribute to rebuild and positively improve the quality of the soil and the system. So that's what regenerative is intending to achieve. I have pulled together this slide, which shows you some of the key principles of viticulture of regenerative practices, and then different forms of viticulture across the top. So a conventional grower would really hardly use any of these things. So they are agroforestry, non-leguminous. These 9 are drawn from Jessica's work, so it's a good paper to have a look at. 9 practices that she identified. Non-leguminous cover crops, leguminous cover crops, animal integration, low traffic, so not driving up and down your roads very often, non-chemical fertilizer, non-chemical pest management, no-till, and then one at the bottom here says redesign the system at a landscape level, which means thinking about your vineyard, not just as a vineyard on its own, but as part of a farm, as part of a system where the water flows, where the sun shines. It's part of where the inputs come and go, thinking about the whole thing together and redesigning it so that it operates better. So these practices can be practiced fully regeneratively. If you're doing all of those, you'd be fully regenerative. Organic producers, for instance, will frequently use tillage as the main mechanism for weed control. Therefore, they're not really no-till, and frequently also, therefore, not really low traffic. They're driving up and down quite a lot. And then these are not prescriptive. Any one of these growers could be doing some of these things. This is not saying that you have to, but obviously with organic and biodynamic, you have to not use non-chemical fertilizers and chemical pest management. Moving on to the next slide. Yes, so again, drawn from Jessica's work, these principles, all 9 of them on this scale here, and then these are a series of different producers that Jessica studied, and how many of the practices are they using? Now the dot colours are colour coded to be red is conventional growers, yellow is organic growers, and green is biodynamic growers. And you can see that most of the organic and biodynamic are in the upper half, but there are quite a lot of conventional growers who are not certified, who are using a lot of regenerative practices. So this is why we feel the message is positive, that everybody can get involved in this and start going down this journey and seeing the improvement in their soil quality. It maybe they go further and become organic and possibly become biodynamic, but who knows what route that would take them. But we have some discussions with the panel about the merits of those kind of forms of agriculture. Very quick slide. We talked a lot about carbon sequestration. It's a very difficult message to say that it's definitely a clear message yet that farming regeneratively in a vineyard will massively increase your soil carbon. The logic is it should. In regenerative agriculture, there are clear science-based evidence to say that it makes a big difference. But the surveys that Jessica looked at, every one of these practices seemed to contribute positively. So this is the zero line, and this is therefore more soil carbon locked up by using these practices. But it's early days, and there are some contradictory studies, and again, Jamie May will investigate this a little bit. We don't think the main message is just a soil carbon message. It's about lots of the other benefits of farming regeneratively. So, first of all, increased biodiversity. The planet doesn't work well. This complex system doesn't work properly if it's not diverse. And that diversity is what creates the stability in the system. So the more species, the more creatures you have or interacting, the more stable it is. Secondly, you're massively reducing your input costs. And if you're a regenerative farmer, the cost of fertiliser now is absolutely extraordinary. It's going up incredibly fast. That's a major, major part of your expenditure, is your what you spend on chemicals. And obviously, if you're reducing that significantly, you lower those costs. You have incredibly much less compacted soil, and really well regenerative farm soils are naturally aerated by the roots and the creatures living there. They bring air into the soil, they lighten the soil, and they increase its water holding capacity really considerably. So you could hold so much more water on your land, on your vineyard, if you've got aerated soil. When it rains, the rain stays in the soil. It doesn't run off and it doesn't sink deeper, it stays in the soil. You also have the chance to have healthy mycorrhizal networks, and your carbon cycle and your water cycle really start functioning properly because all the organisms that do what they need to do are working well and in harmony. And a byproduct that people will tell you about if they've started practicing these is your team are happier going into the vineyards. They just feel better about it. Sometimes you've got animals around, you've got a different environment, and it's you're not taking off the hazmat suit after you've climbed out of your air-conditioned tractor cab. So I pretty much come to the end, but I just wanted to talk about what I call the network effect, which is, here is a random picture from the internet of a vineyard, something growing and lots of things going on in the soil. And there are so many things. I've been listening to loads of podcasts. I've been reading Nicole Masters' book, which actually I think it was Mark who told me to read. It's a great book. And there are so many things that live in the soil that we just barely understand. And they have this economy going on under the ground, exchanging nutrients with each other and helping each other. The plant itself feeds these organisms. It's the plant roots that feed through the exudates. They photosynthesize and they give carbon to the organisms that then return back minerals that they need. So it's an amazing network. And there's a long list of arthropods, nematodes. I studied biology at the university, anthropology actually, but I remember some of these names, and I never have talked about protozoa since, but they're all there and they're all doing things, and we don't really understand them. I also think there's a network in the world of wine. We are a network, all of us sitting in this room. We all do something to do with wine, and we all help the wine ecosystem to thrive commercially, financially, etc., by doing what we do. So we have vineyard owners and workers, we have winemakers, we have people in the PR world, journalists, logistics, marketeers, consumers. We're all needed in order to make the economy of wine work. And I think the role of our organisation, the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, is to be the connector between these people in a network to help the information pass around and to help us exchange information between growers so that they learn from each other. We've heard about mycorrhizal networks under the soil. Plants can communicate with each other that something is attacking them, and the plants next door learn this. Can we, by having a network, by connecting people together, can we be that way of communicating information between us so that we can rapidly roll out the knowledge that's needed to farm regeneratively? And I'm just going to ask one thing of all of you, and the vineyard owners here are excused. Well, actually, they're not, because actually Simon Porter, sitting in the second row here, he's the first vineyard owner, and I visited lots of vineyards, who the first thing he did when we stepped out of his car in the vineyard was take out a spade, and we walked into the middle of the vineyard and dug into the... How many people have visited a vineyard and dug the soil up? I mean, not many. One or two, nearly us. You two I'm expecting, yeah. Of course. People look at what's above the soil, they don't tend to look at what's below it, and go and dig your garden, your window box, whatever piece of earth you have some control over, go and dig a hole in it, pick up the earth, look at it really closely, smell it, try and understand it, because it's by doing that you start the journey of improving it, and I think that's what we're sort of here to do. This is a cheesy slide that Jamie told me not to show, but it's a brilliant photograph taken recently in Ireland of a flock of starlings, I think, over Loch Ness, and quite miraculously they formed the shape of a massive bird. And yes, it may be cheesy. Jamie said Clinton cards to me, but I think it has a really positive message that if we all individually do our own thing, we achieve something, but actually if we all act together, we achieve a whole lot more. So I think this is a very exciting opportunity to actually really step change viticulture for the better, and I hope this session will help you understand what the potential is. So I'm going to hand over now to Jamie and his panel, Mimi and Miguel. So we're going to just move the chair into the middle and set you up with the microphones.
One of the great things about regenerative viticulture, applying this, this existing thing, which is regenerative farming, to viticulture, is that it's fully scientific in its basis. And the real difference is that what we've got here is we've got a discipline that has, is based on an old, the old way of running vineyards, what we call conventional, which is input heavy, is based on an old-fashioned idea of basically ecology, and it's the idea that we focused on the vine primarily as the organism of interest. You stick vines in neat rows. I remember when I first went to vineyards in the mid-90s, the best vineyards had bare soil, and it was just the vines growing out of bare soil. And I think our understanding now has changed, and there's a really important book written, I think maybe 25 years ago, by a guy called Miguel called Agroecology. And Altieri is a Chilean native who's been working as an academic in Berkeley, and he's really, his book was, I think, instrumental in, certainly, changing the ideas I had about what farming vineyards might look like. And the basis is you're seeing an agro-ecosystem. And regenerative viticulture is really agroecology in practice. And so it's about a biodiverse environment where you've got what's called ecosystem services. So you've got soils that work, and so the inputs that you bring are reduced because the soils are working. And as Justin said, this understanding of the soil life is something that's really come on our radar in the last 5 to 10 years, and mainly in the last 5 years. So this is all very new. And I'm really pleased to have two people who are important figures in this now, Mimi Casteel and Miguel Torres. And I just want to start by asking you, and I'll start with Mimi, what's your journey in terms of regenerative viticulture? What does it look like?
Well, I grew up on one of the older wine estates in Oregon. My family's property, Bethel Heights, is where I came to know wine and also came to know agriculture. It's an agricultural region. But I fell in love with trees at a very young age. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, so I had no friends but plants. So I went to university to study forest ecosystems and systems biology, and wanted to live in the forest and not talk to people. And doing research in these ecosystems that I felt most whole and most safe in, I had several epiphanies where, whether it was when I was fighting forest fires or when I was actually doing forest ecology research, it was very clear to me that those systems were dying from the outside in because of the privately held agricultural lands that surround them. And we think, and agriculture has been our way of proving that plants are on Earth to feed us, but plants are there to cycle nutrients. More than 98% of life on land is below the soil. And plants are there to be a conduit of energy, free energy, and feeding that life to keep that cycle of nutrients going. Life is really, and photosynthesis in particular, it is the only process that reverses entropy. And the only way to maintain that is through the cycling of these abiotic minerals. And when I was in the forest doing this research, it made me question everything that I had observed growing up in an agricultural system. And that was when I realized that if I really wanted to participate in maintaining those systems, the front lines is agriculture. And that's why I came back. And I also feel that wine has a very powerful voice and has always been a leading role in agriculture and setting trends. And it's time to start using that voice in a little bit better way and a more responsible way. So that was my journey in a very tight shell.
Yeah, and Miguel, you're a custodian of a sizable amount of vineyard land. So what's your journey? I mean, I remember your father was often talking about how he didn't think organics was the optimal way of managing vineyards. And I gather you're more into organics than he was. So what's your journey bit?
Well, you know, there's always a bit of challenge from generation to generation, right? But at the end, I convinced him we have many organic vineyards. Anyway, well, I come from a family, we're in the 5th generation now, so we have always been a link to the winemaking and to the soils. I remember my grandfather saying that the more we care for the earth, the better our soils. You know, it's something when I was a kid I still remember. And then, well, for many years now we switched from conventional to organic viticulture. And since 2008, that was a very important year for us because it was the year that we realized about the challenge of the climate change, right? And you have to understand that we're in the Mediterranean climate, and these areas are the ones that are going to be more with more effects of the climate change. You know? And as a family, we think for the next generation. So for us, we would like to leave the soils, the winery in better conditions for our kids. You know? So we were discussing about how to reduce the carbon footprint. You know that we have been with a program called Torres and Earth. Through different stages, we're reducing this carbon footprint. And then there was a moment that we start to discuss more about planting more trees, to plant more forest too on our own property, to compensate part of the emissions that were not possible to compensate with current technologies. No? That was on 2020, and that was when the COVID was actually striking. And at a certain moment, we thought, well, how is it possible that a forest can capture carbon, no? And a vineyard is not capturing carbon, even an organic vineyard, no? And suddenly, honestly, we start feeling, you know, that feeling, well, you have done something wrong for some time. And it was a feeling that brought us to learn more, no? So we start to read Fukuoka, or for example, Alan Savory, that I met in person, and it was a great inspiration for me. And since that day, we have been very committed to change our vineyards, and not only that, to try to tell to other vine growers that this change is possible. No? We have an association in Spain that is based. The main purpose is to communicate, no, that this is a change that is possible, that you shouldn't be scared about that.
And so Justin presented the pyramid, you know, the way we think about managing vineyards. You know, it's conventional at the bottom, then we go to sustainable, then organics and biodynamics. And it's like a journey of virtue as well, the idea being that if you're really good, you're going to go to organics, and if you're even better, you're going to go to biodynamics. But what we're hearing today suggests that regenerative is kind of slightly outside that. And one of the questions I think that a lot of people are thinking is, well, what is the difference between organics and biodynamics and regenerative, and to what degree do they overlap? Mimi, could you share some of your thoughts on this?
I think of regenerative practices as more of a way of thinking. It's more of a framework for thinking about systems and cycling of nutrients. It is far more interesting to me to go about the sort of critical thinking process of what is missing, what has been lost from this ecosystem that is keeping it from functioning at its highest level. And not just saying you can't use this list of things or you need to have done things in this particular way. I went down, I mean, I certify organic, I care about consumer accountability, and that's important to me. But even if I didn't, and I was a biodynamic producer, you encounter problems. No matter how good you're doing things, you encounter problems, and you need a systematic way of thinking through those problems to identify what's holding your system back from its highest possible level of health. That is what regenerative farming is. It is a toolbox that helps a farmer think like an ecosystem. We don't teach people how to think systemically anymore. And we need to empower people to be able to be a part of their landscape as opposed to some wizard who walks around with a magic wand. I mean, those days are really over. We need people to be able to understand what's missing and what has been lost and how to put it back and how to keep those cycles going.
Miguel, what do you think?
Well, to me, people who are doing organic viticulture or biodynamic viticulture, there's already something very, very good on them because they really want to start to make a change. No? Most of these people take the decision at a certain moment with certain information, right? So from that point, it's positive. But what I see on regenerative is that it really captures better the information that we have today, you know? The information that we need soils that are alive. This is the only way that soils can capture the carbon again. We need a viticulture that is focused, you know, on a planet that can be sustainable, that focus on the problem of the climate change, you know? When biodynamics started, you know, nobody was talking about the climate change, or when organic viticulture started, nobody was talking about. That's why it is, I think, very, very important to understand that this viticulture is a viticulture that we need. You know, I only see, like, you know, is the only option that we have if we want to keep growing vegetables on a way that is healthier for the planet.
So yeah, so one of the things I see quite often when I visit, you know, what look like well-run vineyards by people practicing organics and biodynamics is they love to till. And if they're even the richest guys will get horses in there to till. And it looks kind of healthy. You see this turned soil and you see the horse kind of going down. It looks fantastic. But what we're hearing is maybe this is not the optimal way to run vineyards. Mimi, is no-till the way to go? Leading question, I know.
Yes. Bare soil can only lose carbon. There's no, I mean, that's just physics. Plants are there to put carbon into the soil to feed microorganisms that then unlock micronutrients and make them plant available. Roots touching rocks don't make mineral wines. That is a microbial pathway that makes that possible. So tilling the soil is constantly setting that system back to an initial stage of evolution. And those very delicate interactions between microorganisms are interrupted regularly, to the tune of 3-4 times a season in some regions. That can't be sustained over time. And you lose organic carbon very quickly. It takes a long time to build it back. So having the ground covered with living plants that are all doing photosynthesis at different rates and at different capacities sort of drives that carbon storage capacity and water holding capacity up exponentially.
So we're trying to avoid bare soil, but we're dealing with, and I think this is one of the things that's coming across with some of the regenerative work that I'm reading, is that it's not about a recipe or a template that can be applied everywhere, rather that what we have with regenerative is this toolkit of approaches, and that regenerative farming involves an intelligent application of elements of this toolkit suited to place. Now, where you're farming, Miguel, I guess most of the vineyards you have very low growing season rainfall, so I guess you call them Mediterranean style weather patterns. You want to avoid bare soil. How do you manage to avoid bare soil where there's very limited water in the growing season?
Well, you know, the thing is that honestly, until we did not, you know, went on to regenerative viticulture, we didn't realize the problem that we were having, you know. So now when I walk in the vineyards and I see that some parcels that we have, even in famous vineyards that we have, suddenly, you know, the connection between the American rootstock and the Vitis vinifera is like 10 centimeters up in the ground or more, no? You realize that all this soil that we have lost, right? And it's because when in Spain it rains, it doesn't rain, well, you know, it doesn't rain much in general, but when it rains a lot. So naked soil really, you know, makes all the water to take actually the best soil, that is the one that is in the surface, and it disappears and goes away, you know. So, you know, for us it's key to have a ground cover, you know, that where we can have different kind of grass that can root there and can actually keep the soils for us, you know. This is key. Yeah,
because I remember visiting Milmanda once, and there's beautiful rocks, and it looks like perfect vineyard soil. They're just these big rocks, and you know, low vigor and everything. But I guess the thing is that you're on a journey where you're thinking about, given the situation you're in with those sorts of soils, what's the best way to farm them? And I guess this is what regenerative viticulture is providing. It's providing some tools that can help you to build up the soil organic material. And I guess the big advantages there, better rainfall infiltration, but, you know, soil structure and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you know, in Spain, you know, like we can only see advantages when we go into regenerative. First, because the soil absorbs much better the water. Also, because even if you know, have the ground cover in the summertime, even if it, you know, gets dry, but it's a mulching effect that really protects the surface of the soil from the very, you know, hot sun that we can have. So the temperature of the soil, the vineyard really goes down on that side. And we also believe that at the end, a soil that has more life, more microbial life, at the end, it puts the ecosystem on a higher level, no? So eventually, that's what we believe, no? That will be a more natural agriculture in all the way possible.
Mm. And Mimi, in your place in Oregon, I've spent quite a bit of time with Jason, and Jason Lett of IRI. He's a no-till advocate, but he allows a permanent grass cover to grow in his vineyard. Mm-hmm. But I believe you're actually more in favour of actually cover cropping, deliberately planting things in, because presumably one of the toolkit elements of regenerative farming is cover cropping, because you can choose various cover crops to do different jobs. Is that something that you advocate?
Yes, but we've established all of that without tilling. So we've drilled seeds in to establish more biodiversity over time in our flora, and to kind of change up the mix of species so that it's a little more tailored to the depth of the soil and the type of the soil. Soils have two ways to hold water. One is with clay. So if you have some clay in your soil, then that's a little bit better off in terms of water holding capacity. But if you don't have clay, the only way to hold water is with soil organic matter. And 1% increase in soil organic matter equals, okay, I'm going to try to do liters, about 68,000 liters per acre extra of water. For us, that's about 18 to 20,000 gallons of water per acre. We were able to grow, through no-till, we were able to grow between 0.5% and 1% organic matter per year. And if you think about how much extra water we're able to hold and how that affects temperature, it really changes the game. You can build resilience in at the farm level when you have, and we have very recently had some of the hottest temperatures recorded in North America in our growing season. So that it gets you a lot.
So regenerative is one of the benefits is you're creating more resilient vineyards in the face of climate chaos. And Miguel, so it's all very well doing this on a tiny scale. Is regenerative farming scalable? The sub-question there is, at what stage are you at implementing this across large areas of vineyards? And then also the question about cost is, are you going to be saving money farming regeneratively?
Well, I think that the beauty of regenerative viticulture is that you can really do it on any vineyard that you want. It is true that there's a transition process, you know. When you start, you really have to know what to do in order to go through this transition. If you just take a vineyard, a normal vineyard, and you start planting seeds in order to have a ground cover, you may face problems, of course, because you need soils that have to nourish, have to give food, to the vines, but also to the ground cover. If you don't have those soils at that moment, then it can be a challenge, But there's a process that you can do it. Most of the times, the soil takes between 4 and 10 years to go through that, and then arrives to a process of stabilization, where the cost that you had before about any kind of product, you don't need them, because already the ecosystem works in a different way. Aside of that, of course, when you have a high value vineyard, it's easier. We can work with animals there, with our own herd of sheep, although sometimes we had a lot of problems with the bureaucracy and the city hall, because they cannot understand that we can be vine growers and have sheep at the same time. It seems that they want us to specialize, and then when we tell them, no, these sheep are going to eat the grass here, they don't understand anything. Anyway, but this is easier, But I believe too that, and we are proving actually, that even in vineyards that maybe they don't go for wines, that have that level of value, you can do it. At the end, the message is always mimicking nature, okay? So you can do techniques in order to mimic nature. Maybe you are not going to till, with a tractor moving all the soil, but you are going to need certain machinery to put the seeds, And you are need a certain machinery maybe to cut the grass to imitate what animals would do. And maybe, you will have to buy the manure, in a place close by, But you can really do a lot of good things, even in a conventional vineyard, in order to capture that carbon and to become more regenerative.
And so in regenerative agriculture more broadly, one of the facets that is seen as a key part of the toolkit is incorporating animals into the agricultural system. And you mentioned sheep. Mimi, I believe you've tried quite a few things, including biochar eating pigs.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about this?
Sure. So I started using sheep a long time ago to do grazing in the vineyard. And then we started following them with chickens to sort of control intestinal parasites and things like that, creating these closed loop systems that control pests and diseases that way. And I got really interested in, it is important to point out, and I'm glad you did, that there are transition periods. And in some of our most arid ecosystems where we grow grapes, carbon is going to be the limiting factor. The agricultural soils across the world have lost between 70 and 80% of their soil organic matter. So if you're starting at such a low stage, you have to have carbon to hold carbon. Carbon is non-metallic and tetravalent, so it can bond in 4 different places. But if you don't have it, you can't hold on to it. And so in some places, an addition of carbon through compost or through something like biochar is a very interesting way to jumpstart that system. So we used pigs in a trial where we basically fed them biochar. And it's good for them. It actually does really good things in detoxifying their...
Should we just explain what biochar is, just in
Yes,
case anyone doesn't know? So it's pyrolyzed carbon source. So it's usually wood or something that's been heated in the relative absence of oxygen. Think about charcoal and pulverized charcoal. And that's something that's been touted as something that can be added to soils to improve water retention, also to improve soil microbial content. Sorry.
Yes, no, it's great. Because all life needs carbon, and black carbon, especially this particular type of biochar, has nothing but these beautiful surface areas and just exponential numbers of bonding sites. But if you apply it untreated, it's a scavenger of nutrients. It will bind all your nitrogen, it will bind all of your zinc and all of the things that your plants need. So we did a trial where we fed biochar through pigs to inoculate it through their intestinal system, basically, with bacteria. So you essentially put life onto that carbon before you put it onto the soil. And then we applied it in its naked form, and then we applied one form of biochar that we had inoculated in our compost pile. And then we had a control that got no treatment whatsoever. Across the board, our water holding capacity in the biochar treated fields went up exponentially in 1 year. In the uninoculated biochar, we had a little bit of a dip in yields that year because our nitrogen had been scavenged by the biochar. But in the biochar that had been put through our pigs and through our compost, we had some of our very best fruit ever. And obviously the control was just to show that nothing new happened here. And that's because we had very low organic carbon in our soils when we started. I wanted to work with a degraded piece of land, and that's what I got. So I think that there are ways to jumpstart a system, and being able to be experimental and learn from each other in learning networks is the way that we can drive these systems and tailor them to the ecosystem they're in. Some places have too much water, some are going to have a lot of challenges having any. So we need to develop those solutions collectively and share them as quickly as possible.
Do you think regenerative viticulture is something that can be certified? Bearing in mind what you say about all the vineyards around the world being quite different, and so, you know, if you were to produce one template and say this is what you need to do in a vineyard to get certification, it might actually not be counterproductive. I mean, what do you think, certification or not?
Well, there's a discussion, about that, and we have spent a lot of time thinking about that nowadays in Spain. And at the end, we get to the conclusion that is positive, that the final consumer knows, what is happening with the products that they are buying, what is happening with the vineyards there, no? So we believe that is positive to have a certification, but what also believe we don't want like one of these, bureaucratic, administrative, certifications. So at the end, we're thinking a lot of basing it on the fact that the soil has to be covered and how the organic material, goes up, and we are storing more carbon, no? So we believe on something very simple, but very attached to a reality, very attached to the change.
So you're suggesting rather than say like a practice-based certification, you need to do this, this, and this, there should be a sort of readout certification, which is the goal is to get to this level of, I don't know, some sort of metric like soil organic matter or something. Presumably that could be a more interesting way of certifying than saying it's about the practices. It's about, well, here's a toolkit, use the toolkit smartly, then it's the readout that we think should be the certification standard.
No, it's that the practices, they can be quite different depending on where you are, no? We have a vineyard in Mazda Plana in the Penedès with a lot of clay and calcareous soil, and then we have another one, Mazda Roche in the Priorat, with slate soil and with slopes like this. And the approach is different, how we, the common idea is the same, but the techniques that you're going to use are different, no? So it's more about the objective that you want to reach. Now in Mazda Plana, we may be at 1% of organic matter, no? Our idea for the future is to reach maybe 4 or maybe even more, no?
Yeah, so in some ways it's like the Olympics. It's like if you win the race, you get the gold medal. It's up to you how you train, but it's about the actual performance. What do you think, Mimi, about certification?
Well, I agree. At the moment, we have a situation where consumer accountability and just the way a consumer comes to know what's in their food is really just through certification. But we've also thereby made healthy food only approachable by the people who have the money to buy it. Certification has done a lot, I think, to teach us about what we can be doing better, but it has created a system where only the wealthy can participate and only the wealthy can benefit. And we're past the point of, I think, being able to accept that level of change. And if we want the future that I think we all want, we need to start meeting people where they are. I think there's still a place for certification. I still certify, but conventional farmers are not our enemy. And by making very, very difficult boundaries for people to cross and feeling like they're being judged when they've grown up on a piece of land and they love it every bit as much as anyone else does, we need a more non-judgmental way of meeting people where they are and saying, this is where you are today, but this is where you could be, and let us help you get there. And I think that's going to be very, very important if we want to bring along the 90%, the 99%, because the early adopters have already done the work. You know, the people who are going to do the work for the right reasons, they've already done it. We need to start sharing this with everybody.
And there's one thing that's unusual about viticulture, I guess, that the species of vine that we use, the Vitis vinifera, doesn't have resistance genes against powdery and downy mildew, which is the reason why viticulture practice, which most viticulture is practiced with varieties of Vitis vinifera, relies on sprays. So this is something that really is not ideal. Compaction issues, carbon footprint, and also just putting things, the inputs that you put on the vines as well. But there exist a whole range of resistant varieties now, and some of them are newly developed, they're quite sophisticated. They're back-crossed using marker-assisted selection, so that you've got maybe 85% Vitis vinifera, 90% Vitis vinifera in them. And they're gaining traction in some areas in Europe. They're being planted increasingly. Do you think that the new resistant varieties that hardly need any spraying at all fit into the future of regenerative farming? Miguel?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Very, very tricky one, I may say. Well, you know, honestly and personally, I don't believe in very easy solutions. No, when they tell me that suddenly they have created a vine that is resistant to everything and can cope to everything. Maybe, you know, on an Excel it works, you know, but I think that maybe we are going to pay at the end, you know, the check for that, no? I think that nature is wise, you know, it has its own ways to change, its own evolution. You know, I can remember many times when we tried to go too fast, you know, and then we realized that it didn't work as we wanted. So I have my doubts.
Okay, Mimi.
I think that, especially in America, there are places where if they aren't at least entertaining the idea of using hybrids, they're not going to be able to do what they're doing much longer. It is very difficult to, even in a regenerative system, to maintain a healthy soil when it is being compacted by 20,000 pounds of machinery driving up and down every other day. And in some vineyards, it's like that. So I think that it's always worth talking about. But I also think that as health returns to our soils, our plants are more capable of producing the secondary plant metabolites that impart resistance. And, you know, when I was growing up, we used to have a plant nursery at Bethel Heights at my family's estate. And when that was abandoned, you know, various things came up from seed. And so sexually fertilized Vitis vinifera. And now those little volunteer vines of unknown genetics, I can go out and harvest them and make wine from them and see, because they don't get powdery mildew. They don't get downy mildew. They don't get botrytis. They are incredibly resistant to everything. And they're beasts on this earth. And I think that at least being open to the many things that we have not yet opened our minds to, because we are just a bunch of romantics at the end of the day. That's why we love wine. But that it's what's in the glass. So if you can make something that changes somebody's mind, it doesn't matter what it came from. And the story is what's important. So I just think there's a lot of things that we haven't tried yet. Whether or not we all have to be planting hybrids or seedlings, I don't know. But I'm very experimental and open-minded.
Please put your hands together to thank these speakers. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Fascinating, and thank you all for coming along. We've got some people here, individuals here, and some companies here as well, and organisations here who are very important to us. You know, we need to keep this conversation going. You know, I'm just beginning this journey. Mimi's been doing regenerative farming since 2005. So between us, we're looking to really build up a pool of experience, and it's been phenomenal to hear you speak. Thank you again very much. I'd also like to thank the trustees who've helped get us here today. It's been a very interesting journey over the last 18 months to get here. I've learned so much, and I'm still such a novice. Got a long way to go, but thank you all very much indeed for coming along.
it is such an honour for me to be talking to you after, in the context of these viticultural heroes. Also someone who makes some nice champagne too, thank you, Charles. There's an awful lot of talk about sustainability. Sustainability is the buzzword at the moment, isn't it? But we're in a pretty bad way, and we don't want to just sustain things as they are now. We'll continue to go to hell in a handbasket if we do that. We have got, regeneration is so much more of a positive message than sustainability, I seriously believe. And so I'm thrilled to have this foundation as a focus for all that knowledge, support, and particularly, as you have mentioned, encouragement and passing on of experience, which is so important. You know, we've heard specifically lack of biodiversity, depletion of these beautiful soil is, I mean, everything that I read and occasionally publish about wine at the moment, everything is focusing on the soil. Who was it? The answer lies in the soil. Percy Thrower on Gardener's Question Time, I can't remember. It is so, so important. And when you just look around at the state of our planet, it is surely not just a moral imperative to do something about this, but it's a survival imperative to do something about this. Any of us who have children, know children, have grandchildren, you know, we have left our planet in a pretty terrible way, and we must do as much as we can to fight that. I am a parasite on the world of wine. I've never grown a vine in my life. I'm not proud to say this. I've never made a drop of wine in my life. All I do is churn out a few words about it. So there isn't so much that I can do directly to support this regenerative movement. But as long ago as 2006, I started my campaign against unnecessarily heavy bottles, which finally, after all this time, seems to be gaining a little bit of traction. A long time ago, I castigated people who used polystyrene that can't recycle when sending samples around the world. And there are so many little details, aren't there? You know, just like switching from sellotape to paper tape and all sorts of things. There are so many little things we can do in our lives, but surely regenerating soil is a complete abnegation of what happened to agriculture after the Second World War, when we all needed quantity rather than quality. It is just so obviously the right thing to do. And I also believe, and I think we've had the hints here, that it's all going to result in better quality wine, which is something very close to my heart. So I love the fact that this foundation is going to be dedicated to improving soil health. Biodiversity. I'm amazed that Bordeaux even, you know, which has been very slow to adopt organic viticulture, for instance, but even in Bordeaux now, there is a real move towards biodiversity and a lot more planting of trees in the vineyard and so forth. So there is a head of steam, and it's all about, it behoves us to encourage that head of steam to really get to boiling point, I would say. So that I truly believe there is an urgent need. I thought it before I came, but listening to all of you, I'm utterly convinced there is an urgent need for this central point where people around the world can discuss regenerative viticulture and share experience, as I say, encourage those who are researching into the detail of it, encourage cooperation, which is so sorely needed. And it's great that it's a charity, a non-profit. So the inevitable thing is that you must pick up the little cards on your seats and do whatever you can, please. I think it's a great idea, and thank you very much for asking me to talk about it. Thank you.